Alrighty, folks, it is still August. I feel like it's been August for a really long time. I don't know if that's just because we've done a bunch of podcasts in the month of August and everything is still happening, but it is still August. We are back from Navy Gold Coast, the largest event on the West Coast where defense contractors get together with the various Navy systems commands, government customers. There's a giant vendor floor in the San Diego Convention Center. There's massive conference presentations. There's panels, small businesses and government contractors working together, and then a bunch of pesky vendors reminding everybody that CMMC is a thing. And we are back from our adventure there today, joined by the great and powerful Holly Flanner, air horns in the background, PR and events manager at Summit 7, who was on the ground in the trenches for the entire event. Holly, hi, hello.
Hi, guys. I'm so happy to be here.
Holly, we want to level set this before we get into the episode, okay? Navy Gold Coast is a location of an infamous event in the history of Jacob Horn. Roughly 3 years ago, Jacob ventured to Navy Gold Coast, and the layout was, what is CMMC? And who is this big red beard guy talking to me about something that we have absolutely no interest in? And so it's going to be interesting to see throughout this, your perspective as somebody that I don't think that you've been working in the DIB very long. So you were able to get a less,
less
influence,
biased.
less bias, less influenced opinion of exactly what the DIB and the people at the show were looking for necessarily as they were coming and as the conversations for CMMC were happening. But 3 years ago, Navy Gold Coast was one of the rage-fueling incidents in the history of the spite of Jacob Horn. Anybody that knows Jacob knows that Navy Gold Coast holds a special place in his heart, and that he is very happy. And I am interested, because I didn't get to go, I am interested to see if this trip to Navy Gold Coast plays any different than the one that I've heard about every time we've shared a beer for the past 3.5 years.
Yeah. So, Holly, why don't you tell us a little about yourself, introduce yourself to the audience, and then we're going to get into your perspective and takeaways before we get into mine, because as longtime listeners know, I have some very strong opinions about Gold Coast. As you know, in our event planning prior to going to the event, I had some very strong opinions about Gold Coast. But this show is about your perspective, not necessarily about mine. So take it away.
I love that setup. And I did hear about Jacob's stories ahead of the event, so I'm happy to dive into how he feels post this event as well. But I tried to stay unbiased with how I felt about it. But like Jason said, I've only been working in the DIB since January of 2024, so very new to it. I still consider myself like entry level as far as there's so much to learn, so many acronyms. But my perspective is kind of unique, just that Jacob and Jason have been in this for so long. So I'm excited to kind of talk through how they felt about it and what my takeaways were as well. But I come from technology. I've worked in it my entire life. My dad was director of technology at a big university here in Ohio. So it's kind of in my blood. I've always worked within marketing on companies that deal in that space. So this was a perfect fit for me.
Awesome. Well, let's maybe do this. Let's maybe frame things for people very quickly before we get into some of your direct takeaways. The one setting that I think would help people understand, besides like the individual sessions and things I heard people say, was no one remembers why CMMC is a thing. Literally no one. With the exception of the 5 people at our table in the main conference hall presentation for Stacy Bosjanek. She gave a presentation on the last day in the main hall, and there were, I don't know, several hundred people in this main conference hall. It's huge. The convention center is a huge space. And during part of her presentation, she stopped and she asked everybody, she said, raise your hand if you remember why CMMC is a thing. Like, raise your hand if you remember why the DoD is doing this. And this is a room full of small business defense contractors. And I had to look around. No one raised their hand. And, 5 years ago, Katie Arrington and the DoD got up on stage at that same event in the same space in front of many of the same people absolutely breathing fire to the DIB about why they're doing it, why it's important, what the catalysts were, all of that stuff. Like Jason said, a couple of years later, we show up. I'm on stage talking about the same thing, explaining what's going on, same people, same venue, same everything. Now Stacy's up there. Here we are, a few months away from both CMMC rules being final and effective. Time has now run out, and all of the hands were down. So you were there for the entirety of the event, several days in a row, in the booth, which you did a wonderful job setting up
Thank
and
you.
coordinating, by the way. We're literally right in front of the door that everybody has to pass through to get into the vendor hall. So there was no avoiding the Summit 7 team if you wanted to enter into this main space. So, I mean, how many people did you end up interacting with? This is a massive event. What did you hear? What did they say? What did they not say? What sort of faces did they make? What was it like?
So I think what was interesting to me was I assumed after the new developments in the rule the week prior that the conversations would be different than some of the events that we had been to previously this year. Maybe some more urgency. But I would say actually it's more of the same tune of still kind of waiting until everything is finalized. Still a lot of uncertainty. And so Jacob, you had prepared that beautiful graphic that kind of explains from the time that you bid on a contract to the time you're awarded, and then how long it takes to get compliant. And I think the most shocked faces came just learning that it takes 6 to 12 months to get compliant. And that's usually then where the conversations would take off of, what? We didn't know it takes that long. And a lot of questions within that.
Yeah, and so we'll link to those episodes below, both the summary of the 48 CFR proposed rule and our episode diving into PALT. It's not PALT, it's PALT, apparently.
Oh, I was wondering.
Yeah,
I was afraid when I said it.
Lead time. Yeah, apparently I learned this when I showed up at Gold Coast. So learning did occur. If you if you read it, it's not PALT, it's PALT. But yeah, so we'll link to both of those down below, and it, like we said, Gold Coast is an event where defense contractors and subcontractors are communicating directly with their Navy customers, right? So NAV War, NAV Sea, NAV Air, NAV FAC, Missile Defense Agency, these systems commands and various DoD components that are buying stuff from the DIB. And the breakdown that's always occurred is they walk in and talk to us, and we're telling them about CMMC. They walk in and they talk to their customer. They don't hear about CMMC. Mm-hmm. And that's because it is true. CMMC is not a requirement until the rule is final. But like you said, we had this big screen that said, once it's final, you are then out of time, because it takes most companies quite a while to get up and running and ready to go. So if that PALT window is only 30, 60, 90 days, and it takes most companies 6 to 12 months, then those 30, 60, 90 days are at the end of your timeline, which means you need to start 3, 6, 9 months before you're planning on bidding on something.
Mm-hmm. So I wasn't at Gold Coast, so I didn't necessarily see the graphic. Was the PALT time posted on the graphic, or was there a discussion of PALT times? I want to know how many times you spoke to like people that came up and talked to you, Holly, and you mentioned the PALT time to them, and they were surprised with how fast it was.
Less surprised about the PALT time and more surprised about the time to get compliant, to be totally honest.
Wow.
Like,
so they were kind of aware? Yeah.
I don't know if they were aware, just more like, oh, holy smokes, we do have to start taking this seriously now.
You can say crap.
She wasn't going to say crap. Holly was about to, on her first episode, hit the buzzer in the first 15 minutes. Let's be honest.
You're back from Gold Coast and Holly is cussing up a storm.
Yeah. California. That's what it does to you.
Yeah, it rubbed off on me. That's funny.
Yeah. So you're saying, so you're saying that essentially when you were talking to them and the conversation on timelines was happening, that there was less surprise from these contractors that were, with regards to how soon after proposal that they would have to be ready for award, and opposed to the CMMC implementation timeline and the time to get assessed and such.
Yeah. Just understanding that you can bid on these, but if you win it, you're not going, and you haven't started the process, then you're going to lose it.
Yeah, that's insane.
You had a note. Before we get into your first note, that makes me think. So you said people were surprised at how long it takes people to get compliant. would you say that you were getting the sense that people walking around the event maybe weren't compliant at
100%.
the time? Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. Like maybe they were
Not a 96, not a 95,
they were
100%. Yes,
surprised
yes. This
that
is exactly the feeling that I got.
anytime you talk to somebody that's very surprised at how long it takes to do implementation, but is currently a defense contractor, always makes me worried because they've probably made attestations to the government that they are currently fully implemented. Did you get that sense? Even
I would
inadvertently
say
from people?
I would say absolutely for the people that were surprised at the timeline that they have not even started. There was conversations had about people who were like, it's on our radar. We know we're gonna do it. It's a lot of just they know it's there, or sometimes they really have no idea. And then the third bucket is always the people that feel pretty confident in what they do and they're more interested in like some eyes for like gap analysis, things like that. But they're like, I think we're good. Maybe we'll have someone look at it and see
what was the
they
rough
think.
split off the top of your head between people who like were surprised and sort of new to the info versus people who seemed like they were a little more on the ball and ready to go? Was it 50-50? Was it worse?
No, I would say probably 70-30. 30% of people are like, I think we're good. I think we could probably have someone come check it out and see how we're doing.
Man,
Um,
I know that's just based off of feel and off of your anecdotes, but
mhm,
that's remarkably similar to the data that shows up in some of these reports about the DIB, about the percentage of people who are ready to go. 20 to
mhm,
30% are typically the section of, I don't even know if we can call them early adopters at this point. It's been so long, but it's usually that first chunk of 20 to 30% that's on the ball and ready, and then
mhm.
it's 70-ish% of people that are, for whatever reason, lagging behind.
That
Right.
watched the weather report before the hurricane came and got out of
Yeah.
town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had a note here, Holly, from some of your takeaways, and you had a note here on the perception around evolving regulations, and people were talking about how they felt like things were changing. What was
Yeah.
that?
It's usually a lot of I always say they're playing chicken with the rule. So I feel like it's kind of that, like as the rules change, they're like, I really don't think this is going to happen, or they're going to change it again. It will get kicked down the road, or it will become less strict or less regulated. So a lot of it is that wait and see approach of just
Yeah.
feeling like, I don't know that this is actually going to pan out.
Yeah, it's tough because, I hear this a lot. I don't hear it as much, but, it seems to still be a very strong sentiment where people go, oh, it just keeps changing. CMMC
Hmm.
is just, the regulations are just so, they're always different in the constant
Yeah.
state of churn. And then you ask them, you're like, well, how about 171? And the fact that it literally hasn't changed since it was published almost 10 years ago. But the CMMC is changing, and you're like, but the requirements that it verifies haven't changed at all. So who
Mm,
cares if you call it 1.0 or 2.0 or 5 levels or 50 levels? If you still have to
exactly.
implement 171, you still have to implement it. So it's always been interesting to me that the perception of which, perceptions are valid. If the DoD hasn't done a good job of communicating it, they haven't done a good job of communicating it. But under the hood, the regulations really haven't changed.
Mm.
CMMC's never been a requirement, but the regulations that currently exist have been unchanged for a decade.
What is that little game the computer game that people play with the simulated people where when you walk up to them, like two of them walk up and they have a little
Sims?
bubble? Is that what it is? Where the bubble pops up and it shows like their interests or
Yeah.
whatever?
Oh,
Imagine at conferences if it like, especially at these CMMC or these government contracting conferences, where like they had this bubble that popped up that said 7012, but it was different colors, whether or not they know it or not. And
What
then
if
you have the
your
conversation, you see where, does that make sense? Like,
what if your
because like
name tag what if your name tag at Gold Coast had to have your SPRS score on it?
oh,
You know what I mean?
that's a
yeah.
conference
Or
idea.
like it reported versus actual, that, sure.
Yeah, that
It
would
would be,
be that'd make people pretty sensitive. Kids at home, if you don't know what The Sims is, which you almost certainly don't, because Grandpa Jason over here is playing The Sims, ask your parents. Okay, all right, moving on here.
jeez.
So Holly, you knows what
I
Listen,
love
this is.
The Sims.
I'm popular with the 42 to 64-year-old crowd, okay?
Anybody want to play Roller Coaster Tycoon? All right.
Yes,
Anyways,
yes.
that is a great game. All right. So Holly, you had some notes here about contractor perceptions around mixed messaging, and you were saying that
Hmm.
people were receiving different advice from various sources and things like that. What
100%.
takeaway did you have like on their sense of confusion here in mixed messaging?
Well, I don't know how much we're allowed to drop names on your podcast, so I'll stay neutral. But I would say, like, even from agencies or organizations that should probably be in the same tune as us and be sharing the same message we're sharing, even when we go talk to them, it is a different tune, it's a different message. And that was like face-to-face conversations at this event, completely different pages from us and what some of what the DoD is saying, and then what they're telling their customer base or the people that are interacting with them.
Deep breath in, let
Man,
it
you
out.
can
Thanks
hear
for
the
teeing this up,
breathing, you can
Holly.
hear the
Yeah,
breathing.
yes.
That's
So
Holly, like this is not to shortchange how long you've been working. You've been working in the DIB for several months now, but you've also only been working in the DIB for several months now. And one of your main perceptions at one of the largest events of the year is like people are not being straight with each other. Like they're not on the same page here.
Yeah.
So you were at Navy Gold Coast, and 2.5 years ago, Jacob, we had a conversation that resulted from a webinar where on the webinar, the chief person in charge of the CMMC implementation of a certain government agency basically told every single person watching the webinar, which is the contracting base that you would talk to at Gold Coast. This was 2.5 years ago. What did they tell them? They told them that this is not a real thing. Don't do anything right now. Jacob, do me a favor, just because these your people. Where did it come from?
It's
Where did no.
That's in the past.
No.
It's in the past.
No. I'm just saying. This is, but that's what happens. It starts, right? You plant a seed. The seed grows into a plant. The plant grows flowers. Those flowers bloom. That takes time. Listen, I'm getting philosophical. Let me sit for a minute. But realistically, right, Jacob, that's what happened, because at some point in time, somebody sitting in that audience tells a friend, tells two friends, tells their supply chain, and that 2.5 year ago misconception, now 2.5 years later, is a systemic problem.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's
this is the results of it.
We still hear
we have somebody new to the DIB talking to these contracts. I keep cutting you off. I'm rude as hell. It's okay. But you get what I'm saying? Like but she's talking. She's not been in this, and she gets the same perception of the misconceptions that we've been trying to break for 2.5 years. And it's directly from guidance issued by the leadership of the people that are supposed to be jumping on board for this.
Yeah. Well, we still hear people say that CMMC is a requirement to bid on contracts. It's literally never been a requirement to bid on contracts ever. Pre-2020 rule, the DoD said in their webinars and stuff, we want it to be a requirement to bid. And when the rule came out, they didn't make it. They made it a requirement of contract award. And to this day, like 5 years later, even though none of the rules have ever said that, people still think that it is a requirement to bid. So yeah, you are right about the fact that, confirmation bias and rumor seem to be the most powerful thing that can contribute to what's going on. You had a note here, Holly, under the mixed messaging that I found very interesting around inconsistent media coverage. And I find this to be one of the more interesting recent trends, in the fact that we were just seeing threads on Reddit and people talking on Discord about, well, there's nothing in the news. If this was such a big deal, it would be in the news. And as we always remind people, it's it'll only be in the news when DoD says something about it. And the way that rulemaking works is the closer it is to being final, the less that they can talk about it. So the less you hear about it, ironically, the closer it is to being done. But that's just not how people are used to consuming information. And so you end up with this weird dynamic. But yeah, so you also had some notes here on, I think probably the most common thing that people hear is resource constraints. What were people saying around that?
Right. And I feel like this kind of ties into the mixed messaging, because I've heard Jason and yourself talk before about if you were a small company or medium-sized company, it's not crazy that they tried to save their money to not put in.
Oh yeah.
So it's like, so if they're hearing mixed messaging and they know that this costs a lot, they might just be trying to like bank away as much until they get to that point where it's really time. But it's always something that comes up of like, how are we going to afford this, or what's going to happen if we have to put these things into place? And like you've said too, like they should be in place. These are practices you've already said that you're doing. However, we all know that there is a lot of work to do to get these companies compliant. So I think that that's a really big pain point that a lot of them are just kicking
Yeah.
that can down the road until they really have to or figure out a way to afford it.
Well, and it's like you said in your note, it's that, the resource constraint isn't just money. A lot of times it's expertise. It's the
Yeah.
knowledge in-house of not only just
Yeah.
how to do the work, but also how to check the work, how to like
Hmm.
validate that it's being done. How do you vet the people that are doing the work? And this is
Yeah.
why the vendor floors are full of MSPs,
Yeah.
because as a small business, it doesn't matter if you're in a regulated space or not. It's less expensive to outsource expensive niche work that isn't the core to your business. And so the MSP industry, not just in this particular segment, the MSP industry has grown like exponentially over the years because companies just don't have that sort of internal knowledge and expertise. They don't have those resources. And so that's why, for years we've been talking about the importance of this is why you need to ask about 171A
Right.
and what the MSP does in context of 171A. Because if you're not going to do it in-house, you have to trust that they're going to do it. If you don't
Hmm.
ask the proper questions for evaluating what they're going to do, then you're probably going to get left high and dry when somebody shows up to actually check that you've been implementing those requirements. So the resource constraint thing is always going to be a problem.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're about ready for the 32 CFR rule to go final here. The 48 CFR proposed rule came out, and I remember you can go back and read it in previous rulemakings where they talk about it, and they say Congress told us to create this program. We're creating this program, so we're standing up policy in one rule, we're standing up a contract clause in another rule. Unless there is some sort of specific funding appropriation from Congress for this specific DFARS clause, then we can't help you. There's no money, right? It isn't that the DoD is like $1 trillion organization, just has like a gigantic pit of money that they can pull from. At least not for this. The colors of money problem is a real problem for the department. And so they always say in the rules, they're like, just like any other DFARS clause, complying with it is going to cost you something, which means it needs to be reflected in your rate. And if you're some subcontractor on the other side of a prime and they don't let you negotiate your rate, that's between you and the prime. So
Hmm.
the resource constraint thing is definitely not going away, but
Hmm.
I was hoping to hear a little bit more from the prime contractors at Gold Coast about this problem, because they are conveniently silent about this problem, since most of the DIB technically works for them, not for the DoD. But maybe we'll hear about that at the NDIA New England cyber event that we're going
Oh,
to go
yeah.
to.
Is it conveniently silent or strategically silent?
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like conveniently silent because I don't want to put my business out there and let all the other 5 companies that I bid on all of this work with know exactly where we stand. And then strategically silent to certain companies because they're like, hey, this is our way of telling you this isn't going as well as you think it's going.
Yeah.
It's not you, it's me.
Yeah. You got to know, Holly, about unclear responsibilities. Speaking about primes and subs, you got to know that people were bringing this up. Did people talk about prime versus sub dynamics and what that viewpoint was? I mean, it wasn't just about DoD stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a conversation that I have at a lot of these events. But one particular conversation is he felt like since they were a sub, that it didn't apply. And then we were asking about like the CUI flow down and it started to like get into the nitty gritty, and his eyes kind of glazed over and he's like, oh crap, I think this might apply to me. So I do feel like there's just confusion of like at what layers does it apply, and people aren't reaching out to have those conversations because they're just assuming, or maybe they're embarrassed that they don't know. But yeah, I feel like that's going to be a sore subject when they find out that it does apply to them.
Yeah, for sure. It's the prime sub dynamic is definitely one that we have strong feelings about, because
Hmm.
the primes have been very quiet in the event that the DoD legally can't really talk about rulemaking while rulemaking is ongoing. That doesn't mean that the primes can't talk about it.
Hmm.
And we had Daniel Akridge on not that long ago, and he was saying he's getting phone calls every day from people who are getting very one-way conversations with the primes about their compliance posture, rather than any sort of conversation among business partners that you might expect at something like Gold Coast. So that was that was interesting to see your note on that. You also had a note about enforcement uncertainty and people's perception of like the impact and urgency around CMC. What was your takeaway there?
Yeah, I feel like that kind of goes back to just like when people say the rule is constantly changing. I think they just don't really understand when it's going to be enforced and how that's going to impact them bidding on and winning and all when they'll have to report and be assessed, all those things. I feel like there's just so much confusion around that for them.
Yeah, I've got a note on this later on with some of my takeaways from the sessions, but Missile Defense Agency has their own small business conference. It's like that, it's MDA's version of Gold Coast, if you will. And at that event, they had a session specifically on CMMC. And the last slide in the deck said, it's coming, don't wait. You have to have CMMC in order to take award of our contracts. And so when I hear people say like, oh, we don't know, we haven't heard anything, we don't know what's going on, there obviously is a breakdown in the conversation between customers and their contractors and their subcontractors. But then you go dig into these slides and there's always some mention of it somewhere. And so I don't know if DoD will ever be able to go back to the magic that they had in 2019 and 2020. I mean, for those that don't remember, I mean, they were literally on webinars multiple times a day, every day for weeks and months straight. I mean, they were everywhere all the time talking about it. And the only thing that they really got, as we can see now, is a bunch of uncertainty about what was in the rule, which is why agencies don't talk about what's in the rule until they're published. So we just posted on LinkedIn, Department of Education is going to issue a proposed rule around CUI requirements for colleges and universities taking grant funding under the Higher Education Act. And that's all we know. We don't know what's in the rule. We don't know the details of the rule. We don't know timelines. We don't know enforcement. We don't know rationale. We don't know anything outside of this one official abstract on this one OMB website. They don't have press conferences. They don't have events. They don't have webinars. They don't have press releases. Nothing. That's the way that rulemaking is supposed to work. And so now you have all these people saying, well, we don't know this, we don't know that. And it's just going to be a really rough day when those final rules come out, because DoD right now is doing what's normal. Back then, it was the anomaly when they were communicating all this information. So like the lack of awareness and everything like that, I just don't think that people, if you're expecting that DoD is going to come out and have like a biplane with a banner flying across the sky over your neighborhood telling you that CMMC is here and here are all the details, it's just not going to happen. It's just going to show up in a call from the prime, something in the Federal Register that nobody reads, and that's all there will be.
Yeah, I truly do think that that's like they're waiting for like a letter in the mail that says, hey, this applies to you. And I think it's more of they just have to listen, have the conversations with companies like Summit 7, ask the questions and find out, because I don't think anyone's going to reach out and let them know till it's too late.
I just don't think that the letter is going to be exactly the letter they're looking for.
Right.
Yeah, maybe that wouldn't work either.
And you would think
it's funny that this compliance letter is coming from the Department of Justice. Like,
hey.
But you get what I'm saying? Like, isn't that the truth though, right? Like, hey, we're sitting around waiting for somebody to tell us to be big people and live up to the expectations of the contracts that we sign, right? Yeah. I don't sign anything I don't read, unless it's actually receipts for restaurants, but that's a whole other story.
Wow. Humble brag. Hashtag humble brag.
That wasn't even a brag. It's just like,
I don't know. It seemed like a brag.
So yeah, I mean, it's just in terms of
maybe I don't need out.
In terms of enforcement uncertainty, it's just I just don't know I just don't know what to tell people, right? Where it's like we can anticipate this like cone of uncertainty for when things are going to impact, and then try to extrapolate from the rules. But you have to ask your customer. And if you go to an event like Gold Coast with all of the DoD customers and they're not talking about it, what are the contractors supposed to do? Right? Like are they supposed to take this leap of faith from what people are telling them on the vendor floor? Or are they supposed to listen to what their customers want them to do? And this is the trap, right? We call this the implementation trap, is that when CMMC comes out finally, it's verifying a thing that you said you already did. It's not starting you down the path of doing a new thing. And so those companies that jump early are at a humongous advantage. And the companies that jump late are not only at a huge disadvantage, they're at like a huge legal disadvantage depending on how spicy their customers want to get. We had another note here from Shane from our team who was at the event, and he was talking specifically about perceptions of MSP support. And he said that the few organizations I talked with about support seem to be 100% unaware if their current MSP or MSSP is going to be CMMC compliant or is even aware of CMMC compliance, which is a really big problem. Did you interact or hear about any of that while you were talking to people?
Yeah, I think I've overheard Shane talking with a couple people about this one. I usually punt those conversations over to the more technical team, but
Sure.
yeah, I've heard this is same thing, same sentiment at other events I've been to. They don't understand, they don't know if their MSP is prepared or ready, if it's on their radar. And I think we've even spoken with people who thought their MSP was working to be compliant and then come to find out that it was a mess. So that's just
Yeah.
a messy situation as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is what Daniel was saying too. We're starting to get phone calls from people who went with very affordable options, is one
Mhm.
way to put it. Very quick options, a little while ago, and it's costing them a tremendous amount of money to
Yeah.
get out of those contracts or to go to somebody who knows what they're talking about to rework everything in order to meet these requirements. And I mean, I just can't stress it enough. If you are entrusting almost the entirety of your ability to continue doing DoD work or to win DoD work, and that is a major part of your business, and you're entrusting that process to an external company, you need to be very thorough about whether or not that external company knows what the heck they're doing. And the
Mhm.
number one way for you to do that is to ask the same questions that the assessors might ask. Please tell me on this chart, what parts of 171A exactly are you doing for me? When I pay you this money, how do I know that I'm getting the things that you're claiming to give me back? NIST has sort of given us this roadmap. It makes it very, very convenient. Just ask for the shared responsibility matrix from whatever MSP that you're thinking about working with or currently working with. And if they don't have a shared responsibility matrix mapped to 171A, run away. At this point, it's not
Mhm.
2019 anymore. You need to run in the other direction
Or
because
real question: if they say what's 171A, and I've had real conversations within the past 2 weeks with companies that it's like, hey, I need an SRM for 171A, and the company's like, what's that? And this
yeah,
was after they invested $100,000.
yeah, for sure. Well, I guess let's get into some of the things that I saw in the sessions, and then we can wrap up maybe with some overall takeaways. So I spent more time in the individual sessions, sort of observing DIB companies interacting with their customers, what they were talking about, what they were worried about, and what they weren't talking about, and maybe some of the things that they didn't seem to be all that worried about. Hint, hint. So one of the sessions that jumped out, because this is like a 3-day event, it's a big event. One of the sessions that jumped out to me was the Missile Defense Agency's small business director giving a presentation. It was standing room only. I mean, the room was freaking packed.
Wow.
Everybody was in there interested in working with Missile Defense Agency. Missile Defense Agency is interested in working with everybody. They are on the warpath to have as many small business prime contractors as possible. It's a big initiative for the agency. They are there to do business. One of the things that jumped out that was very interesting was they were talking about their PALT time. Go back and watch the episode, everybody. Very important. And they said that in order to go as fast as possible, they are actually planning on putting MDA orders on non-DoD indefinite awards. So GSA has this massive indefinite contract vehicle called Oasis Plus, humongous government contract. Well, MDA says, why would we bother spending the time to write our own definitive contract if we could just make a task order and put it under the umbrella of Oasis Plus, which should make you think, hey, MDA, you just gave a presentation a couple weeks ago at your own small business conference saying MDA contractors will need CMMC in order to take award, but you're putting RFPs and task orders under a non-DoD umbrella. So how's that going to work? And they were like, well, we'll just have CMMC requirements on our orders. I was like, let me get this straight. There's going to be CMMC requirements on orders under a GSA contract umbrella. And he was like, yeah. I was like, man, people's heads are going to explode. They're going to,
Nonchalantly. Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
see CMMC,
Everybody does it.
even though it's DoD, right, issuing a task order under a GSA umbrella, you're still going to see CMMC requirements show up under the umbrella of non-DoD contracts, which is sure to get everyone's attention. But he didn't even blink. He didn't even hesitate. And he's like, yeah, we'll just add the requirement onto this thing. We'll put it on a task order under Oasis Plus so we can go as fast as possible, reducing the halt time, making sure that CMMC is still in there, regardless of whether it's a DoD contract or not. I mean, the disparity between the people in the room not asking about this, not really being aware of compliance timelines, like you said, Holly, and MDA's just sort of nonchalance around how obvious it was that, of course, we're going to put CMMC and task orders under non-DoD contracts was very striking to me. And like I said, and we'll have an image of this on the screen that we'll have on here, but the slide deck from the session on CMMC at MDA's conference has a summary slide that says CMMC is on its way. Do not wait for the official release to start preparing for your CMMC certification. Big yellow box. MDA contractors and subcontractors must meet CMMC requirements to be eligible for contract award. But during the MDA small business session at Navy Gold Coast, not a peep about CMMC. Not a word, not a slide, not nothing, except for the one crazy guy in the corner asking about it being on the MDA stuff. Nobody asked about it at all, which is why when Holly's in the booth talking to everybody, they go, what the heck are you talking about, lady? Like, we were just in the MDA thing and they didn't say anything about this. Like, what's going on? Which just fuels what you talked about in terms of this disparity in perception between customer requirements and what's really happening.
Right. And it kind of reminds me, I know one idea you had for this conference was coming up with questions that people should be asking, but it really is that, like, you're asking the questions and raising that awareness, but people don't even know to be asking these questions to the speakers. And
yeah.
Did you have that perspective, or when you, Jacob, when you asked those questions that should have been being asked, did you see more people kind of gravitate towards like paying attention to you, or like more gestures within the audience of people agreeing with kind of the things you were saying?
A few people would come up to me afterwards and say, hey, a handful of people would ask about it. We would, go down to the booth and talk about stuff. But for the most part, this is very subjective. For the most part, anytime I was in any session and I would ask about CMMC, people's eyes would either roll or glaze over, or the air in the room would just kind of stand still. People hate it. They hate it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to do it. The presenters don't want to talk about it. The contractors don't want to talk about it. Everybody wants to do business. And this is exactly why it's a thing. This is exactly why it's a thing, because it has to be forced into this conversation for it to be a thing. Stacy Bosjanik's session was like, does everybody remember why we're doing this? The thing about Gold Coast that was very interesting is if you go to all the main stage sessions, it's about doing business and it's about small business, right? The real undertone of all the presentations is we're about to go to war with China, right? It is very obvious when you read between the lines of what they're saying on stage that we need a crap load of submarines, we need a crap load of munitions, and we're about to go to war. And the irony of that is the reason that CMMC was such a big catalyst was compromises to submarines and submarine-based weapons systems that they got on stage at this conference 5 years ago and told everybody was so important. 5 years later, nobody wants to hear it, but nothing has improved. And so it's like, it's enough to literally make you lose your hair, everybody, because you're just standing around being like, this was not that long ago. Clearly, we still have a bigger picture perspective on why we're all here. This is not really about doing business. This is about the lethality of the United States military. And we're undermining it by not being able to even have an enthusiastic conversation about basic cybersecurity after several years. So one of the other things that came up for me here was the entirety of, there were no sessions on CMMC. There were basically no questions on CMMC. However, the entirety of the DoD's suite of tools, services, and helpful programs for cybersecurity in the DIB were at this conference. The NSA Cyber Collaboration Center, DC3, Project Spectrum, Apex Accelerators, and Stacy on stage talking about the DIB CS program. And as we've talked about before, that's the team, everybody. That is the entirety of what DoD is offering to you to help with your cybersecurity, which means the most important question for everyone to ask is, to what degree do those programs, tools, and services help facilitate my requirements? Yes. Do they have some extra security benefit outside of the requirements? Of course they do. But the thing that everybody cares about, as you experienced firsthand, Holly, is what's required. When do I have to do it? What are you going to do for me in terms of those requirements? And I went into these sessions and actually kind of hurt their feelings. There was a little bit of a scuffle on LinkedIn a couple of days later because they would get up there and do their presentations and they would say, we help the DIB with cybersecurity. They would use terms like, this is the total package, or this is a complete solution. And then you would ask them the question that we recommend everyone asking: what do you do in the context of 171A? And it was total avoidance. It was total. They didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to talk about the mappings. They don't have the mappings. That's not really why we're here. And then it slowly, over the course of the event, turned into me being the bad guy, asking the question that everyone in the DIB should be asking about the tools and services on offer from DoD. And I'll just put it to you this way. Everyone's being told to go talk to Apex Accelerators to help them with CMMC. The Apex Accelerator people are trying their best. But if you walk into the sessions from NSA, from DC3, from Project Spectrum, you know who's mostly in the audience? Apex Accelerators, learning about the things they're supposed to be teaching you about. So we have a very shallow, circular process of tools that are not going to get people very far. Just
and
to
facilitation,
just to end my rant here, this is the ultimate takeaway. If you only use DoD tools and services, if you were to fully engage with the entire set of offerings from DoD, you won't pass your CMMC assessment. End of story. That's all you need to know. Engage with them, use them. They're great tools. But if that's all you do, you're screwed. So you need to talk to somebody outside of those sessions.
Jacob, the only thing that is more poorly executed than the implementation of NSSP 800-171 in the defense industrial base, and that's at like a roughly 22% last reported rate from DIBCAC, the last that we saw, and those are antiquated numbers, is the 18% successful reporting of incidents in the DIB. And so my argument forever has been that these products, and I'm not going to stand on a mountain, I'm not going to do anything, I'm just going to say it simply, these products are not for CMMC, but they have great benefits for the DIB.
Yeah.
To solve one of the two problems. We have presented two solutions. The one solution, implement minimum security baselines. The second solution, report your incidents. 800-171, CMMC is covering the first of the two evils that the DoD is trying to combat. The second of the two evils is incident reporting. And that's where you get me these things. The other thing is trying to limit user inactivity. But the fact that you throw a complete solution or a complete package or whatever other nonsense that you may have heard kind of makes me happy that I was on the East Coast when the Gold Coast happened.
Well, and the thing that struck out to me was the difference in attendance between the sessions. So, there were multiple sessions going on in the same time slots. And any time there was a session about what is the Navy buying, what is Nav Air buying, what are the Syscoms buying, they would go over in those sessions their long-range acquisition forecasts, how to get in touch with their Office of Small Business Programs, how to do business with the DoD. Those sessions are freaking packed. And if there was a parallel session about DC3 or cyber tools and offerings, it was easily half as packed as the other ones. And most of the people in the room were Apex Accelerators, CMMC consultants, people who already know what's going on. So, I didn't take any pictures or anything like that, but it was a definite, distinct difference between, I like the alliteration there. There was definitely a noticeable difference between the attention and energy around solving cybersecurity on its own, outside of its context, tied to CMMC, and everything else, which gets back to my overall point. The DoD, please, DoD, for the love of God, I know you don't like it, right? I know the NSA doesn't like it. I know DC3 doesn't like it. I know people don't like it that you have to frame things in terms of what's required. But Holly will tell you, she watched it happen for 3 days straight. The only thing that people care about is, when am I required to do it? What am I required to do?
Hmm.
Everything beyond that is just icing on the cake. And most people aren't in the market for that.
100%. Yep, I
Sorry to
agree.
put you on the spot, Holly. It's just, I just couldn't believe it
Yeah.
walking around. I just couldn't believe it walking around, especially like you said, the rule had just been published. The
Yeah.
48 CFR rule had just been published. Stacy had just gotten on stage being like, you know that this is still a thing, right?
Mhm.
And everybody was like, I guess we'll find out when we get there. So it's just very interesting. There was one slide in Stacy's presentation that we'll have up on the screen that I was particularly proud of in my own little nerdy corner of the world. They had a slide called strategic nesting. And on this slide, they had a picture of all of the dusty, obscure strategy documents that have been released around DoD cyber strategy, industrial base strategy, the national cyber strategy. And it is this picture of all these strategy documents pointing to the defense industrial base cyber strategy that was recently released. We did an entire episode on it. And what does that document say? CMMC is the crown jewel thing that the DoD is going to use to have assurance over their requirements in the DIB. And so we'll link below. We have a podcast episode on every single one of these documents that people don't like to read.
That's what it
And
looks
this
like. It's
is
like
the
a rundown.
slide that Stacy opened with. She got up there and she was like, oh, you don't think CMMC is a thing? Has anybody read these hundreds of pages of strategy documents that have told you that CMMC is the thing? I know it wasn't on CNN or whatever, but we've clearly been communicating to people who have the eyes to see that this is the direction that everything is going. So I was particularly proud of that. Still, even though when we do podcast episodes on them, they're not the most popular episodes. When they come out, they're not the most read documents. But when the DoD gets up there, that's the language that they speak. So if you read what they're putting out, it's clear as day that these things are coming around. So that's my ranting from my side and my experience. Jason, you're hearing this externally. Like, what are your thoughts here?
Soaking it in. First and foremost, the strategic nesting, I think that is a term that we coined.
Is it?
Yeah, because I think we started pointing out how like it's a strategy within a strategy within a strategy, like a Russian nesting
Like
doll.
nesting dolls, yeah.
So I'm going to fully claim it. Stacy Bostjaniker. This is from Stacy's slide. So Stacy,
Yeah.
I know you're listening at home. Just let me know. Slide in the DMs. Let me know. The second thing is that what's great about this is that there is an episode thumbnail for our show for every single one of these documents. Like in my head, I'm looking. There's a thumbnail for every one of them. I know that we've had to read every single one of them. It's great that we cover the boring stuff. I certainly appreciate that. And then externally, it sounds like, although you had more conversations about CMMC at Navy Gold Coast, that you're still battling those demons from 2.5 years ago, wherein it is not getting the necessary attention that it should get. And now, 2.5 years ago, we could get it. There's a little uncertainty. Now it's kind of an issue. Like now we really got to talk about it,
Yeah.
And I think that is the thing that really stands out to me the most. I thought, much like other conferences that we've gone to recently, where we saw more speckles of CMMC being sprinkled into national conferences, Black Hat especially. I saw multiple CMMC offerings that were there being portrayed. CMMC actually on, the actual, the marketing material in the booth. And so to have it still at this, at in a DoD agency ran funded event, you know what I mean? That's kind of troubling.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, Holly, what do you think? I mean, we didn't even have a ton of time to interact at the event because we were all so busy. So, I mean, from your takeaways, talking to the team, maybe hearing what I was seeing in the sessions, like, you got any last thoughts on your perspective on the event? I mean, this event was just last week, but in your short time working in the DIB, what do you think about the situation here?
Well, I mean, I guess the reason we go to these events is to just keep educating the DIB and what you guys do with your podcast. So from that angle, I do feel like we had amazing conversations, and the people that we did speak to recognized the need after we communicated to them. And I feel like the resources we gave were great. So we're out there, we're trying to keep doing that work and educating people. So I feel like from that perspective, very successful. From the perspective of we're 2.5 years into this, and the lack of awareness and education, that's kind of a bummer. But
Yeah, kind of a bummer is how I would phrase it for sure. But it is I find it overall, I find it fascinating though, because of why, even though a lot of the information is out there, there still are roadblocks. There's systemic issues, there's economic issues, there's psychological issues, there's all sorts of issues that keep it from taking hold. I'd say that overall, I had a much more positive experience at Gold Coast this time than I did a couple years ago, thanks in no small part to all of your hard work, Holly. It was much more pleasant.
Good. I did not want you to get laughed at again this year.
Yeah, no,
so
it didn't get. I didn't get laughed at.
It was very damaging. We had a lot of conversations.
I still feel terrible. I still feel terrible. It was awful because there were booths of people in the vendor hall at this Gold Coast who were at the event last time, who came by and they just straight up laughed in my face when I told them it was a thing. Didn't hear very much from them this time.
No.
They weren't coming around to shoot the breeze like they were a couple years ago. A lot less confident. So I would say in some, my ultimate summary of it was, it seems like everybody has kind of made their bet at this point, where a lot of people have made the bet based off of their understanding of what's going on with rulemaking, based off of looking into the future and seeing how they can capitalize on the situation, that they are doing the thing. And then there are a lot of people who have somehow, through various means, convinced themselves that it's not a problem. They'll get a waiver, they'll get an exception, it won't happen. And there's increasingly fewer and fewer people in between those two camps. But thanks to all your hard work, Holly, I think we probably reached out to all of those people who were in between those two camps at Gold Coast.
Yes.
Couple things real quick before we bounce. One question that I kind of have for both of you is that, knowing what you know about what stands ahead in the timeline for CMMC, how do you envision Gold Coast 2025?
Oh, man, that's a good question. Holly, what do you think?
I mean, you're more of the expert on the timeline, but I mean, next summer, I mean, we'll be talking to people who truly are experiencing the repercussions of waiting. So I think that will be interesting conversations to have. And then hopefully the people who have benefited from going early, like that will be the conversations, is the people who did it and people who didn't, and us helping out however we can in between.
Yeah, I think there's probably going to be a lot of people who are super happy, and there's going to be a lot of people who are super stressed, because summer of next year, based off the current timelines, the rules will be done and final, which means DoD can talk about it at that point. Right. There will be a moratorium on them talking about rules and progress. So, that's a great question, man. Gold Coast 2025 is probably going to be extremely different in terms of... in a very good way for a lot of people, and in a very bad way for everybody else. So, yeah.
And then the second thing is, hey, as you're watching at home, like and subscribe, tell your friends.
Yep. Always. Holly, thank you so much for sharing your experience from Gold Coast. It's a pleasure. You did an awesome job, and we hope to have you on again soon.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thanks for making sure where we need to be.
I was going to say,
that's Holly's job here.
100%. 100%.
I'll see you guys in Boston in a couple weeks.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.